So this is a good time to talk very briefly about my philosophy of education. I wrote a paper on that. It's not something I'm seeking to publish in a journal or anything, but it is available on my blog. My philosophy of education paper goes through the journey of how I arrived at that philosophy. It's not an instructive document that says, therefore, these kinds of education count and these kinds don't, or I'm in favor of this and not in favor of that. It's really the background and what is the driving idea, not specific detail. My philosophy of education rests on core philosophical axes. You can think of philosophical axes as the framework or foundation that underpin a philosophical system or theory or ideas, or as foundational principles that map the relationship between ideas. I think of my own philosophical axes like a Cartesian coordinate system with X and Y axes that define points in space, creating a line with a particular directionality, which I'm about to explain here. So these are my philosophical axes. Autonomy, freedom, self-determination, those are kind of grouped together, are the human drive and aim. And then relatedness and belonging are our state of being and existence in the world. And we're talking philosophy here, so that's an ontological claim. You could say maybe that this idea of autonomy, freedom, and self-determination is some kind of existential, it's the point of existence. I'm not sure the exact philosophical word for that, but that's kind of the thing we're oriented to in our existence. And then our relatedness and belonging is our ontological state. It's our state of being. So then, the directionality of freedom, and by directionality I mean we're always moving towards that as humans. We're moving towards autonomy, freedom, self-determination. We're seeking that out in some regard, okay? This changes culturally, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with that, but I am putting forth the idea that that is our directionality, okay? This directionality of freedom within our ontological condition of non-separation necessitates, predicates, and indicates a relational responsibility where self-sovereignty is oriented to the flourishing of all. What this simply means, if I could put it in simpler terms, I don't like always putting things in simpler terms because I don't want to gloss over the complexity of things. But to put it more simply, we're driving towards freedom, but the point of that freedom is the flourishing of all of us. Why we would be oriented that way or want to see that is because we are all connected. And with that comes that relational responsibility, comes a responsibility that our freedom is not just for our own personal goals and well-being and flourishing, it's for the flourishing of the whole. You may have noticed this is also a philosophy of life. In fact, this is a philosophy of life on which my philosophy of education rests. So education, if that's kind of how I see the world, education then works towards those aims. Voiceover Renee popping in here to say that I missed when I recorded this video saying that not only does education work towards those aims, but within my philosophy of education, those things are also the means. So what I mean by that is that the development of freedom, autonomy, self-determination, those are the means by which we do education. They're not something that you achieve at some later point after you've gone through an appropriate amount of development or an appropriate amount of being told what to do. They are the way it is done. Similarly, our fundamental connectedness and relatedness and how that calls us then to care for one another and to have responsibility for one another, those are also the means. They are not an end that is achieved after developing a sense of disconnection, a sense of competition and inequality amongst each other, understanding ourselves as fundamentally relational, connected, and belonging to one another. They are the how we do education. You'll maybe have noticed that in this philosophy of education, I say nothing about school subjects or what is to be taught. Those things are subject to these underlying principles of the freedom, autonomy, self-determination, and our fundamental relationality and our belonging to each other and our connectedness. What we teach should all be subject to that. The things we're trying to have our children or students, our young people learn would be things that would help them live those ideas. It's not about if I value math over art or whatever. It's about, does the teaching of this idea, this skill, this subject, does it meet the ends, and are our means, how we are doing it, aligned with those ends? This philosophy got its start in my undergraduate education and then grew in the dynamic, evolving, and intensely relational context and process of homeschooling, which allowed for a high degree of coherence between philosophy and pedagogy, which was very satisfying, like I've already talked about. I got to practice something I believed in without a lot of constraints, the constraints that a lot of teachers in a school system would experience. I'm having a change in the light here, so I'm gonna move to a different area in the yard so I don't have a bunch of shadows falling on me, and we're gonna pick back up with this. Is this gonna work in this new location? I think so. Let's continue on with finishing up and wrapping up philosophy of education. Talking about philosophy of life and philosophy of education is all very heady, intellectual, but practically speaking, the kind of education that my life philosophy informs and how I homeschooled my kids is not like the dominant education system of compulsory attendance, age-segregated classrooms, mandated curriculum, and hierarchical ordering of subject matter and relationships, to name just a few examples. That was a long sentence, holy moly. Okay, shortened and simplified. What I envision for education, how I practiced education, does not align and is not represented by the dominant education system. Because of the difference, or this huge gap between how I conceive of education, my beliefs about education, my both life philosophy and education philosophy, and how things actually are, that gap feels very huge to me. And that is why my dream to influence education and have a seat at a table where decisions are made about education feels so audacious. Not only is it audacious because, as I was talking about earlier, who am I to think that I qualify for that, or that my ideas are of value, or that I should influence. It's audacious also because my philosophical axes inform a way of living and educating that is very much contrary. I don't want to say against. I don't think of it as against, but it's like going a different direction than what exists. It's decidedly against maintaining and reproducing our society's social, political, and economic status quo. As for like what those kind of education models look like, I'm honestly less interested in detailing those, but I can kind of put them under certain umbrella frameworks or like under certain headings that they more align with. Big heading would be alternative education, broadly alternative education, and more specifically self-directed learning, interest-driven homeschooling and unschooling, relational and ethics of care education. So ethics of care is a philosophy, as well as anarchist education, democratic education models, and emancipatory education. And there's a variety of ways to practice and do education even within those different models that I just threw out there, or those different framings.